Okay, so memory, explanations of forgetting, interference. You should at this point have watched the AO1 and understand the two types of interference and similarity of material. This is going to be AO3. So how good is the research into it? Isn't there real world applications, things like that. End of the knowledge, you'll be able to apply it. So you'll have some understanding of what it actually means for you in real life. Right, and maybe apply it to some other situations, and you'll be able to evaluate interference theory. Is it good? Is it bad? Evaluate lab studies and real life studies in relation to. Okay, this is all AO3. The first one and the big one is sometimes you might go, oh, it's a lab study. That's therefore it lacks ecological validity. Blah blah blah. But in this case, with regards to interference, there has just been endless amounts of research into it that just always consistently show that interference has a detrimental effect on memory. There's nothing out there that's saying, oh no, interference doesn't exist. Okay, it does. So the first big positive is that lab studies over and over again since 1931 have shown the same findings consistently. Right? And the positives for lab studies that you're starting to get to know that it has good internal validity, so we control a lot of the variables. There's not other things that are going to get in the way. So it has internal validity. It definitely is testing what we know it's going to test, and it is a very valid explanation for forgetting. People would not argue with you that interference exists. Artificial materials. This is referring to what you actually look at. So when you look at a study, you want to look at what are they using, what word lists are they actually real life, is it a real life situation? And there's a better chance of interference in a lab study than in a real life study. Lab studies will use word lists, and okay, as occasionally you're asked in real life to remember words. You go to the shop, you've got to remember a list of things. You might look at it over and over again, but that's not what probably 99% of our remembering on a day-to-day is. We want to, real life faces, what something looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like. It's very, very hard to test that. So the fact that there are artificial materials means that it's not real life, and it can take away from the validity of this. Right, so this is not what we'd necessarily have interfering with our memories in real life. Therefore, interference may only be a good explanation in a lab, not in real life situations. So it's very hard to remember 10 faces that you walk past down the street and then find 10 faces that are similar or 10 faces that aren't, and then go back. It's very, very hard to do this experiment outside of a lab. So the materials are artificial. There was one, and this is quite a good study to kind of counteract that. You would say, however, Badley and Hitch in 1977 asked rugby players to remember the names of teams they've played so far this season. So you imagine that, football, whatever. Who did you play last week? Who did you play 2 weeks ago? Who did you play 3 weeks ago? Who did you play 4 weeks ago? Okay. Results showed clearly that accurate recall did not depend on how many games played. Players' recall of the team from 3 weeks ago is better, though, if they had not played any games in between. So it's about this idea of interference. If you played every week for 4 weeks, you're going to get more interference because there's 4 teams. You're less likely to remember that team of 4 weeks ago. However, if you got injured 4 weeks ago and that was the last team you played against, your recall would be a lot better. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. It's showing this kind of interference. The more teams you play, the more interference you get. Real life study. Right. Okay, so time between learning. What it's saying here, and it's not the best point, but it's saying that if you're going to run an experiment, you've got to do everything close together. Here's your word list. Learn that for 10 minutes. Go away 20 minutes. Come back. Learn another list. Right. Tell me. Recall. It could all be done in an hour. And is that realistic to real life learning? Is that realistic to what we usually do? And that's the point here. We make sure that interference happens to the participant by everything happening in a short period of time. So again, is it like real life? Is it realistic? The idea of cues, and what a cue is like it starts with a L, or it rhymes with this, or you try. Lots of cues are used by teachers all the time and friends maybe to try and make you remember things. In this case, interference effects may be overcome using cues. So Tulving and Potska, 1971, used 5 lists of 24 words in 6 categories. Categories assumed to be obvious to the participant. Recall was about 70% of the first word list, but fell the more lists the participant were given. Okay, that makes sense in our sense of interference. Were first list good, second list not so good, and by the time we've got up to 5 lists, the categories, it's all blurred together and we're getting lots of interference. But after a cued recall test, the recall rose again. So what it's saying is that it was in our brain, but it's this idea of recall that we're struggling with. Whereas if there's a cue, so the next word begins with B or whatever, a slight clue, our recall rose again. So it is in our brain, but it's this idea of recalling it and the interference there. So it's just showing that cues have an effect as well, and that would be an AO3 point. Okay, that's it. Next lesson, the second part of forgetting.